Karl McCombie from Merseyside Police, who's going to be talking about unheard voices, barriers to reporting, intimate partner violence, and police response effectiveness. So it's all over to you, Karl.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
all good.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to present here today. It's interesting to hear some of the research that's already been presented. But yes, my research will be barriers which prevent victims from reporting intimate partner violence or domestic abuse, and it's evaluating the effectiveness of a police response, particularly mandatory arrest policies. Next slide, please. So what we'll be covering is I'll be just giving an overview of the violence against women and girls and the issues that that's causing us as a whole as society. I'll discuss some research questions and then what my research identified in terms of the themes, and then I'll go on to discuss the implications for future practice before hopefully tying it all together with a concise conclusion. Next slide, please. So violence against women and girls, as I'm sure we're all aware, is a societal issue that we're all dealing with in this policing world. And in terms of the issue itself, it is an umbrella term which covers a vast array of offences, everything from sexual offences to coercive and control to anything in between, really. And fundamentally, it's a societal issue and a human rights issue, which is specifically targeting women, and ultimately it's something that we need to tackle as a police officers and as a society in general. The scope of the problem is huge. Globally, 30% of women have been subjected to physical or sexual violence, with the offences only increasing as we're going on. And in the UK, these statistics show that a woman is killed by a man every 3 days. And this is all influencing women's perceptions of safety, because women are going about their daily lives in a different way to men because their perceptions of safety are being hindered by this ongoing threat and the perceived threat of violence against them from other males, really. Next slide, please. So the research questions that I wanted to answer was, what barriers are there that are preventing women from reporting intimate partner violence to the police? And how effective is, when actually women do report it, how effective are the policies we've got in place to safeguard those women and prevent further offences in the future? And in particular, I wanted to look at mandatory arrest policies, because at the time when I did my research, there was more of a shift from discretion to we're expecting you to make an arrest. So I wanted to look at what that entails in the long term to prevent further offences and reoffending, and what influence this has on police officer discretion, and then also what impact mandatory arrest policies have on female victims especially. Next slide, please. Ultimately, there was a lot of research out there, so it was more of a broad overview around every entire issue. I know there's certain research it's already just kind of focused in on one aspect, but I wanted to get a holistic view of all the barriers, really. So I separated my research into 2 themes and then 2 sub-themes in each of those themes. So there's internalized victim perceptions, and then stigma and intrusive cultures, followed then by the policing practice. So I was looking at the mandatory arrest policies and police discretion, and then the impact of dual arrests on victims. So next slide, please. So what the research shows is that there's complex misconceptions about what abuse is and how victims perceive abuse. They imposed a barrier themselves to reporting, where a lot of victims didn't recognize psychological abuse like coercion and control. They didn't think because they didn't have any bruises or marks to show a police officer that didn't meet this threshold that they were actually victims. And a lot of situational factors came into play in terms of financial dependency on the partners. Children are a massive factor as why women, if they're in a domestic abusive relationship, why they don't report the abuse to police, and also negative interactions or previous situations with the police where they have reported it and nothing's been done, as I've already seen in the first presentation. All this influences why women don't want to report things to the police. And these women negatively associate the term victim. A lot of them didn't see themselves as victims because they perceive a victim as someone who's helpless and can't look after themselves. And then that didn't really compute with their own perception of themselves. So they didn't want to acknowledge that they were a victim in their relationship and their life. They just developed what was called a culture of pretense or a persona of normality. They would be abused in the home and then just tell themselves, this is just what my life is. This is just what my relationship's like. And then when they leave the home, they would act normal. The family wouldn't have any idea what's going on. And ultimately, they develop this pretense that this is just what my life is like now, and this is what I've got to get used to. And they'd normalize the abuse as well. It's not something that they would ever, if they could take a step back, maybe they would realize that it wasn't normal, but ultimately they become so entrenched in this relationship and this abusive relationship, that's just why they wouldn't report things to the police. And there's a big link to shame and embarrassment, and like I mentioned there, identity conflict. They couldn't compute or reconcile their own identity with that of a victim. And there's also a big fear of repercussions, both from the perpetrator and of professional repercussions as well, due to there's lack of reporting services. I'll discuss that further on in the presentation, but yeah, next slide, please. There's victim factors and cultural influences. Stigma was a very big issue where victims often thought they were dismissed or trivialized when officers attended. And then regarding the medical community, when they did report something, they would be dismissed again by doctors who would try and treat their injuries. The police victim overlap is very considerable as well. A lot of victims in the police would not report their own victimizations because they perceived that the culture of policing and the culture of you just get on with the job didn't again compute with their own idea of a police officer. And then supervisors as well were flippant and dismissive of their concerns. Next slide, please. Regarding mandatory arrest policies, this was initially looked at because of the Minneapolis domestic violence experiment, which was in 1984 in America, which found that arrests drastically reduced violence and offending. And the mandatory arrest, the way the policies are run, it's must arrest, arrest are recommended, and then may arrest. Over in the UK, we don't have mandatory arrest, so I wanted to look at whether that came in, what does the evidence show? And ultimately, it shows that there's no material impact on reoffending, which my finding and my take from that is we can't arrest our way out of this problem, and it's a counterproductive policy. While an arrest is a viable option, and it is a very important option that officers can exercise at their discretion, but that's the issue for myself and what the officers who were interviewed, part of my research, I didn't interview them themselves, but in the research that I conducted, it was they thought their professionalism and their discretion was being eroded because they are being told to arrest and they've got no choice in the matter. So there was mixed responses. Officers could see the value in it, but a lot of officers realised that it wasn't an ideal thing to where you take away an officer's discretion. Yeah, next slide, please. What was found that there was a dual arrest on victims. Victims were often arrested alongside the abusers because it was mandatory arrest. Oftentimes, if an officer attends, everyone's getting arrested if there's a counter allegation. And oftentimes the abuser would phone the police first, portray themselves as the victim. And then when officers attend with the mandatory arrest policy, they would arrest the victim. And then victims were often shocked and hurt and distressed that they could ever be perceived as an abuser, because often in their minds, they're clearly the victim, but there's a lot of the times when officers attend instances, it may not be clear and obvious, especially if it is a coercive control type of abuse. There's no visual indicators that the abuse is going on. It's more of a slow erosion of that person's character. And a lot of the times officers may attend and the victim is finally reached that breaking point, hysterical, and the abuser is calm, being open and engaging with officers. So this is a type of massive issue where if mandatory arrests are brought in, it could often have unintended consequences where if a victim is arrested, it could have financial impacts. It could be in a position of trust in a hospital or any kind of notifiable occupation, which then we have common law disclosures that could then have all sorts of issues on child contact. and then also discourage future reporting. Next slide, please. So the implications for future practice are that there's training is a big thing where we're going to have to try and push. Arrests are not always or shouldn't always be the first port of call, and we need to try and introduce some kind of implement confidential disclosure services as well, which thankfully in Merseyside Police we now have that, and officers to remain open-minded and develop professional curiosity. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, it's a multifaceted issue regarding the barriers why women aren't reporting, and this professional and cultural stigmas are problematic and they are prevalent in multiple workplaces. But to overcome that, it's found that empathetic, non-judgmental peer support is vital to help victims realise that they are victims of abuse, and especially if it's coercive and control, being non-judgmental and understanding of that, what that victim's gone through, is vital to help them overcome and actually report the matter to the police. And the best intentions can result in further harm. So while we may want to arrest that perpetrator and put them before the court, not often, it may not be the best course of action, where if we're not trying to offer that long-term support, long-term guidance, it's not going to do anything for that victim other than possibly result in further consequences or repercussions. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Karl. A question for you. Has your research changed the way you approach responding to intimate partner cases, or how you speak with colleagues about it?
Yeah, my research did make me realise how everything's not as it meets the eye when you attend an address. You've got to be trauma informed as well. We've done training in Merseyside Police on that, recognising ACEs and things like that. If I went to a domestic abuse incident, now I'm being aware of all these things. So that was one of the key factors, was training as well, in terms of making officers aware that if you attend an address, it's the person who's acting calm, acting compliant may not be that one who's the victim in this case. It may be the one who's finally reached the breaking point. It's just remaining open-minded, and then just the ABCs, isn't it? Not assume anything, believe, like say, no one, but ultimately we're there to safeguard that victim. So yeah, it's changed the way I think about domestic abuse and made me realise that there's a massive amount of barriers to women reporting abuse, and it's only really opened my eyes to the significant impacts that an arrest can have on a victim as well. If we arrest a victim alongside an abuser, that is going to be detrimental to their confidence in the police.
Thanks very much, Karl, and thanks to all of the 4 presenters in this session.